And being 7 o'clock on a Monday, we might as well get started unless there are any objections from the peanut gallery. All right, cool. So today we got a new project. We're gonna start, so we'll start kind of beginner friendly. Today we're gonna be modeling a little tiny motor. So this is a little 5-volt motor. I'll show you where on the internet I got this thing. It's a little 5-volt stepper motor. Comes with these little driver boards like this right here. We're going to model this motor today because I have been working on an automatic window blinds system. So in my apartment I have window blinds. Does anybody else have window blinds in their apartment? So, you know, it's got the little rod that you twist to open and close them. So I've got this working here with you know, that little motor, and there's a little ESP8266 to control everything. And I posted it on Instagram. Maybe I'll show you guys at the end of class today. But now I can yell at my Google to open my windows, and it opens the windows for me. So there's some mechanics in here. There's the motor, which turns these gears. So we'll get to model some gears, which will be fun. But we're going to start with the motor. And without further ado, let's just kind of jump into it. So I started a new project, and I would encourage you folks to do the same. To start a new project, we go to our home button here in our, I don't know, browser. It's not really a browser, our cloud. Go to the home icon in your cloud, and then you can see this new project button up in the top. If you click on that new project button, then you can name a project, and I'm not going to do that right now because I've already done so. Oh boy. Right now I've got one called new project, and I've called mine automatic window blinds. Our project is going to have a number of different files in it. So I'm choosing to draw this as a series of separate documents. And that's because, like, I choose to do things in this way when I think the parts that I'm going to model might be useful in other projects. So, you know, I might want to use these little 5-volt stepper motors in another project, so it'll be handy to have them in a document all by themselves. So, you know, if I choose to use them later, I don't have to draw it again. I can just import that model into my project. So that's why we're going to do it that way. And once you've started a new project, we can go ahead and start a new document. So up here in my new design plus button in my new design tab, I'm just going to click on that. And now I've got a new design here. I'm going to close my little window just so I maximize my drawing view here. I try to make these first classes beginner friendly, so we've got our navigation cube over here in the top right hand corner. This is how we'll navigate around our drawing environment. You can't really see that I'm doing anything because there was nothing in that drawing, but you can see here in this one that I've got lots of stuff. As I move that navigation cube, our objects in our drawing view shift around, right? The top is where all of our tools are. The top menu is where all those tools are. The bottom is a couple of tools that I don't really use a whole lot. So there's an orbit tool that basically does the same thing as that navigation cube does. It lets us spin around, rotate around our view here. We've got a hand tool. I don't use that a whole lot because I'm pretty sure if I hold down the Control, Shift, Spacebar, nope, I'm wrong. I thought there was a way for me to do that with my trackpad, but if you're using CAD like a normal person and you have a mouse, hopefully I'm not insulting anybody who's in our audience right now. Okay, good, perfect. So middle mouse button, if you click the scroll wheel, if you click that down and move around, I think that should be pan. And then You can zoom in and zoom out with tools down here, but I just like to use my trackpad and zoom in and zoom out. You can zoom in and zoom out with a scroll wheel as well. As we start drawing, some things will happen. We'll start getting objects in our browser here that will populate. We'll get folders, and in those folders will be, in the sketches folder will be sketches, and in the bodies folder will be bodies. I'm kind of going over this kind of quickly because I think that most of you have been to class a couple of times here, but I try to make these beginner friendly. So, and then at the bottom, we've got a timeline of events that's going to take place. And this is kind of like a series of steps that we took to get to where we are at the end, or where I am here in this drawing. You can see some sketches and some extrusions. We'll talk about some organization and keeping things straight as we go. But for now, let's start by making a sketch. When I look at a part, I try to figure out what is the way that I can draw a part in as few sketches as possible. So like here I could see, if I think about this part two-dimensionally, I've got like a rectangle, and maybe I could draw a rectangle and then revolve that, but then I'd have to have another sketch where I have my little mounting brackets here, and I'd have to have something else where I have my motor. I'm probably going to choose to ignore chords. But if anybody is really curious, we can totally draw a chord, and maybe we'll see where we're at when we get towards the end of class, and then I'll cram a chord into the last 5 minutes of class. But for now, so I think I'm gonna choose to draw it in this orientation. So I'm just gonna think about it from the motor down, I guess, the shaft down. So I'm gonna go up to my Create menu, and I'm going to create a sketch. So in general, we start by creating sketches, and then we take those two-dimensional sketches and make them three-dimensional after the fact. I'm going to draw on my front surface, just because that's a habit I have of drawing on my front surface. But you can draw on any one of these three surfaces that it gives you, these three planes that it gives you right off the bat. But I'm going to go ahead and click on my front plane, and now I spin around so I'm looking down at that plane. Now I have more of a two-dimensional view here. It should be noted, even though I'm sketching, I can still look at this two-dimensional sketch in a three-dimensional way just by moving my navigation cube around. And then if I want to get back to the front, I just have to click on that front plane. So I'm going to start by drawing a circle. I'm going to make this a center diameter circle. So I'm going to come up to circle and then center diameter circle. I always like to, as a rule of thumb, have some part of my sketch that is kind of like anchored to the origin, anchored to the middle of my drawing view here. And oh, you know what? And I forgot to mention, I'm drawing in freedom units. So if you haven't changed your units, I would encourage you to do that. So if you spin down the document settings drop box here, and we hover over the units here, like the default when you first start Fusion is to draw in millimeters, but I don't like millimeters. My brain thinks in inches, and you know who else draws in millimeters? Putin. So just one more reason to not I don't want to use anything, do anything that Putin does, so I'm just going to stay as far away from that as possible. So we do that by drawing in the standard unit of measurements for all free countries, which is like us and I believe Liberia and Myanmar. I believe those are the three of us. Anyway, so center diameter circle. This circle is precisely so I'm just measuring the outside of my motor here. It is 1.095 inches. So 1.095. I'll zoom in on that. And then I'm just going to click to place that measurement.
Where are you finding that? I'm sorry.
So from the Create menu, I went to Circle and then Center Diameter Circle. Oh, are you editing a sketch? Are you making a sketch?
I'm making a sketch. I've got it together, but I can't find where I insert the measurement.
Oh, so if you already got a circle, so it's already there, then that's totally fine. So if you, let's say here, let me do, that is just another way to draw. So when I encourage people that when they see numbers, when they move their mouse out and you see numbers, you should let go of your mouse and just start typing numbers. But if you don't do that, if you just make your circle, you can add a dimension to this after the fact. So from the Create menu, if we scroll down to Sketch Dimension, and now we choose as the object that we want to dimension this circle, and I just click on it, and then I move my mouse out or in, either one, and now this is a measurement that I can place. So now I'm placing that measurement, and for me it says this circle is 0.815112 inches. And now we can just change that number. So I can type in my measurement of 1.095. And when I hit enter, then it will scale my circle or constrain my circle's dimension appropriately. Cool. All right, so the next thing I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to locate my little mounting parts here. I've got these little wings, and I guess I'm going to assume that they're around the center point of the circle here. So from my Create menu, I'm going to come and grab a center rectangle. So for my rectangles, I'm going to grab the center rectangle option. And I'm going to click and place the center of my rectangle concentric on the center of my circle. So it'll be right at the same center point as my circle. So I'll just click to place that center and then move my mouse out. And now I can let go of my mouse because I can see numbers there. And I'm just going to specify that the width is going to be 1.647. So 1.647, and the height of this center rectangle is going to be 0.269. 0.269. Yes. All right, cool. And then I'm going to hit enter. All right, so my my wings here are they're not a rectangle. It's like a curve that sticks out here. And what I'm going to do to make those curves is to add a fillet. Now I suppose there's a number of ways to do this. So maybe let's do one each way. And there's probably benefits to doing them both ways. So the first way that I thought about doing this was by adding a fillet. So a fillet is in the Modify menu, and it's the top option there. The first option is called Fillet. And to use the Fillet tool, we specify the lines that we want to fillet, and then we give it a radius. So if I want it to be exactly half of the width of my rectangle there, I can just use Fusion to do the math for me. So I can do 0.269 divided by 2, and that will give me exactly half of that distance as my radius. And then I can do that a second time. So I'll grab my fillet tool, I'll choose these two other lines here, and again it's 0.269 divided by 2, and that gives us the other half of our piece here. It's convenient that it also gives us a center point to put our hole in. Now, the other way that we could think about doing this is with a 3-tangent circle. So I don't find a whole lot of uses for this tool, but I'm sure that this is one of them. So if from the circle menu, from the create menu, I come down to circle and then to 3-tangent circle. Now I can make a circle just by specifying the tangents, the lines that it is going to be tangent to. So for example, I can click on this top line, excuse me, and then the line on the left there, and then the third line is going to be this line on the bottom, and it will make that 3-tangent circle. So there's two ways to do it. I am curious now. So, you know, whenever I find that there are more than one ways to do something, I choose to do the thing that is going to be the most easily changeable later. And I bet this fillet option, if I start changing this measurement, it's gonna swear at me. Yeah. So when I made this fillet, it broke somehow my center diameter circle, or my center rectangle. So now it's no longer centered. I'm going to do Command Z a couple of times because I'm curious if I choose to do this 3-point circle or 3-tangent circle, excuse me, for both sides.
Command Z.
Yeah.
How do I do that? I'm sorry.
Control Z.
Oh, Control Z.
Yeah. Sorry, I used to use a Mac, so I used to use command. But they had a command key on a Mac, not a control key. But you'll notice that when I choose to not use the fillet tool, all of my lines stay black here, and that means all my lines are still fully constrained. So now if I choose to change a measurement, it didn't break that center rectangle feature that we had going on. So so that is probably the better way to do things, is choosing that 3-tangent circle option. But I leave things up to your own perspective and point of view. All right, so now we can draw the mounting circles that are on either point, either side of that. And I'm going to grab my circle tool, my center diameter circle tool for that once more here. So I'm going to come over to circle and then center diameter circle. And then I'm going to make 2 of them. One of them is going to be on the left side there. And I happen to know that these are 4mm circles. After I went on my weird tangent about Putin measurements, now I'm using them. But they are in fact an international standard, and good people in Ukraine use millimeters too. So, all right. So 4 millimeters is going to be what we use for that. And you'll notice that I can just type in millimeters even though my drawing units are in freedom units up here. I can just type in millimeters and it automatically does that conversion for me to inches. But when I double click on them, they pop up in millimeters for me. Just as a housekeeping point, I try to keep my drawings looking kind of neat. So, you know, here I've got some units that are crossing over each other, and I try to avoid that kind of thing if I can. And if I can kind of clean up my drawings so they look a little neater, you know, it's just easier to look at later if I need to do so. All right, cool. So now we're getting there. We're almost there. So the motor has kind of a big end to it. It's got some junk in the trunk. So that's the part that I'm going to put on next here. And I think I'm going to choose to do this again. I guess I was thinking I was going to do this with the center diameter circle, but now I'm thinking let's try something new. So one way you can choose to draw things is by adding constraints after the fact. So what I think I'm going to do here is if I draw a line, so if I grab from my create menu and I grab my line tool and I draw a line from the center of my motor circle straight up so until it meets the top edge of the circle there. What I'll do, what that'll do for me is it'll create a point on kind of the farthest end of this circle. And now I have a point that I can dimension a line from. So if I grab my line tool again, and I'm going to do a really bad job of making a line. So I want this line to be straight horizontal like this, but I'm going to do a really bad job of it to show you that you can make things snap into place with constraints. I am going to give this a dimension though. This line is going to be, oh, my caliper's turned off. This line is going to be 0.567. 0.567. All right, and again, doing a bad job of it because what I really want is the center point of that line to be set right underneath the center point of my circle here. So now that I've got that line, I can start to kind of force it into place using some constraints. So I'd like that line to be straight horizontal. There is a constraint here called horizontal vertical. So I can just take this horizontal vertical constraint and then click on that line and it will snap that into straight horizontal.
Where are you getting that from? Utilities?
In the constraints menu. You see it? No?
Not fine. This other thing, I think. Interrupting. I'm off somewhere else.
Oh yeah, so here, if you go back to solid,
All right.
and then you, we're at sketch. Oh, here, you should click on sketch.
All right.
That's where, there we go. So now you got that constraint.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got it.
And then we chose that horizontal vertical constraint there. And then we just clicked on the line that we made. So here we can see that constraint is right there, but I'm going to delete it so I can add it again. All right, so now if we place a point on our line, so if we come up to the Create menu and I come down to the Point option, I can place a point right on the center of that line. So when I hover over the line and I see the blue triangle appear, then that's how I know I'm snapping to the line here. And tell you what, I'm going to turn off half the lights in the room here, so it's a little bit easier to see the screen. I just have to take a picture of the wall. According to this, some of them are already off. There we go. Now it's a little easier to see. All right. All right, cool. And I just place a point right at the center of that line. Now I can use that horizontal vertical constraint again. Kind of counterintuitively, I guess. So I can use this horizontal vertical constraint, and I can click on that point that I just placed and then the center of my circle. And you can see it kind of snaps it in place left to right, so it's going to be centered on that circle the whole time. And now the last constraint that I want to add here is a dimension constraint. So I want to set the dimension between this line and the opposite side of my motor here. And I'm doing that because it's real easy for me to measure that. Like, it's easy for me to stick this in my calipers and go, all right, that's the dimension right there. It's much more difficult for me to try to do that, to figure out like what some sort of like what that distance is and kind of eyeball it based on where it's tangent from the circle. And so it's much easier to measure that other dimension. And to add that dimension from the Create menu, I can just choose that Sketch Dimension option. So that was that option that we talked about just before when we were talking about adding dimensions after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and click to place the one side of that dimension, and then I'll click again on the point on the opposite side of that circle there, and now I can place this dimension wherever is convenient for me. And the number that we're going to use for that dimension is 1.206. It's actually closer to 1.201. The motor is slightly tapered, so 1.21. 1.21. And like
1.21 or 1.20?
1.21.
Okay.
Yeah. The motor's got a slight taper to it, but we'll just kind of go with the big part. All right, cool. So something you'll notice is now my line that I had down there that was previously blue is now black. So now it's kind of like fully constrained. It's locked in position and dimension. And that's always a good thing. I like when we can see drawings that are like kind of fully constrained. Now the last thing that we need to do here is to just connect the dots basically. So in the Create menu, I'm going to come over to my line tool, and I'm just going to draw a line straight up from the endpoints of each of that line that I made down below, and connect it to the circle. And something that's important to note here is, here I've got my perpendicular constraint that is popping up there. So here, if I were to do the line, wrong, you don't see that blue box, that blue square that pops up telling me things are perpendicular. If you don't see that and your line is not black, it's because you don't have, that angle is not determined. It's not fully constrained that way. But we can add it after the fact, just like we kind of have been doing here. So you can see the constraint over on this side is that little perpendicular icon there. To add that to this other side here, I can go ahead and choose this perpendicular constraint from my constraints menu. I can click on the line, the two lines that I'm making perpendicular to each other, and then it goes ahead and snaps that in place there. So that's one way of drawing this bottom section. Just as a side note, I guess the other way to do this, the other way that I can think of right off the top of my head is we draw our line straight up, so we've got this point there, that's important. And then we could use the 2-point rectangle tool, and I could just draw a line from the center outwards and like do a really bad job of it, right? And now I could use my sketch dimension option and dimension this line from this point, and type in the measurement that I had, which was my 1.21, and then I could dimension the length of this line here as being half of, so I measured it to be 0.567. I could make it half of 0.567, and then I could just use my mirror command to mirror these two things over on the other side. So another way to do it, lots of ways to skin a cat, even though you should not do that because cats are friendly and you shouldn't skin them. It's wrong. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that. All right, you know who likes skinning cats? Putin. All right, so now I'm going to locate the shaft of our motor, which is probably the most challenging part to measure on this whole thing. So, and maybe what I'm going to do is place it wrong and then dimension it into place after the fact. I think that's what I'm going to go with. So I've got two circles that I'm going to place on the center point of the circles is going to be on this line that goes straight up and down. So from the create menu, I'll go ahead and choose the circle option, and then I'll come over to center diameter circle, and I'm just going to place it somewhere on this line. Now when I place it somewhere, I definitely don't want to place it in the middle of this line, because we're going to force this into place using constraints after the fact. If I already have something that's constraining it to a position on that line, it's not going to be friendly with me later, and it'll swear at me about things being over constrained. So I want to decidedly make sure I don't place the center of the circle on the midpoint of that line. And this first circle is going to be 0.355. 0.355. It seems real big, but I guess I'm just looking at that wrong. Yeah, 0.355. All right, and then I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to place one more circle, and this circle is going to be 0.189. Actually, I'm going to make it 0.19. So I'll grab my circle tool again. This circle is going to be concentric on that first circle we made, and it's going to be 0.19. So that's our actual motor shaft. And I'm going to hit enter. All right, so this is a new thing that I've learned pretty recently. So normally, when you use the sketch dimension option, the sketch dimension tool, you use it to dimension points from other points or points from lines, if that makes sense. So like we specifically made a point up here so I could dimension something from that point. On this circle, we don't have any points. I guess we could make them, but there is an option that's kind of hidden. So if you click on Sketch Dimension, and now while I have my Sketch Dimension tool active, if I right click, you can see that there's a little teeny menu that pops up. And I'm not talking about this circle menu here. I'm talking about this menu down here. So the default is pick circle arc center, and you can change, so that would be like clicking on the center point of the circle. You can change that dimension option to arc tangent. And what that'll let me do is it'll let me click on, oh, it's interesting. I think it'll let me do this. It'll let me click on this circle. In fact, I don't think I have to be any particular part of that circle. And now I can pick this other circle. And now I'm dimensioning the tangent between those circles. And that's something that is going to be doable to measure. Just with my calipers here, I'll get pretty close. 0.056. Let's try it again just to be on the safe side. Yeah, 0.056. 0.056. Cool. And once we added that dimension, you'll see that it popped into being nice and fully constrained. We got a lot of black lines and no blue lines. That's a good thing. All right, and then the last thing that we need to add here on our sketch is the motor here has two flats on the shaft. It's got like two flat sides. So I'm just going to add that with a center rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create, and then Rectangle, and then Center Rectangle.
Shit.
The good kind?
No.
Okay.
My gear jumped on top of the motor.
Oh, you're putting gears on already.
Well, the drive shaft, I mean.
Oh, okay.
It jumped up, and it is now on the outside of the motor.
Huh.
So we have to back step a few times.
All right. Yeah, so I'm going to choose this center rectangle here. I'm going to place the center of the rectangle at the center of those circles that I've been creating here. And I'm just going to move it outwards. And then the height of this rectangle is going to be 0.11. One of the dimensions is 0.11, and then the other dimension, I'm gonna leave blank, even though that just feels wrong in my soul, having blank dimensions. You know, what I want is for this line to be as long as that's as wide as this circle is. So I'm going to come and add a constraint, just in the interest of being fully constrained here. I'm going to add a tangent constraint to this line. So if I come up here to my constraints menu and I choose the tangent option, now I can click on the two lines. Oh, I really only need to do one, because it's constrained to the center already. So I just made one of those lines tangent to the circle, and it went ahead and snapped it into place for me. All right, cool. So that is the entirety of the sketching that we're going to need to do here. 40 minutes in, we can finally make something three-dimensional. Woohoo! All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click Finish Sketch. I've got now a sketches folder that's appeared over here, and in that sketches folder in my browser, we've got a sketch called Sketch 1. I'm going to name this my motor profile.
Carl?
Yeah.
Before you get any farther ahead,
Yeah.
when I was trying to fix my shaft, what are the dimensions of that center rectangle?
That center rectangle is 0.11, and then the other dimension is just tangent to the circle. So
The
it's
inner circle?
yeah, the inner circle.
0.190 then?
Yeah. Yeah. That would also work.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the advantage of like using the tangent in order to define the height is if you were to change this circle, if I were to change this to like 0.25, then that automatically changes that line. Whereas if you dimension them separately, then you have to kind of go and change that other measurement as well. But we just measured with a caliper, so you know, odds are those measurements are pretty good. I suppose it depends on who's using the calipers, and maybe you gotta take my measurements with a small grain of salt, considering I'm the one using the calipers. But all right, cool. So now let's go ahead and start extruding some stuff. We can extrude this all out from this single sketch plane, which would be convenient. So from the Create menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Extrude option. And I'm going to start, I think, by extruding out what I'm kind of considering actually, you know what I could probably do here is, there are two ways to make selections in Fusion. So if I click here, that's the selection tool that I don't like. Let's go ahead and choose the window selection tool. If I drag from top right to bottom left and use a selection box that way, you see I got a solid blue line filled with yellow. So it will only select the items that are fully enclosed within that selection box. If I do it the other way, if I drag from top left to bottom right, it will include anything that selection box touches. So I have a whole bunch of items, towards 21 objects here that I just collect with just one click and drag, which is handy. So it's basically everything except for these little wings. Now, if we had used the fillet command, we wouldn't have this little problem where we got wings here, because those would have been filleted in. But like I said, my preference is always to do the thing that's going to make it fully constrained. So, all right, and now the dimension that this is going to be 0.028. So I'm gonna choose to do 0.028. It did not enter any of those numbers in. 028. There we go. And basically that's just like the little front cover of this motor, and the thickness of those little tabs that I've got on the sides there. You know what? I don't want to extrude those little holes. My little 4mm holes there. Cool. And then I'm going to click OK here. I'm going to do the motor body next. So I'll grab from my Extrude, from my Create menu, the Extrude tool again. Again, I'll use that box selection method. So I want to pick, I don't know why it's defaulting to this window, that selection tool. All right, Extrude. Oh. There we go. Alright, something is going wrong. There we go. I'm gonna have to go and do this manually. Do it the old-fashioned way. There's a lot of bits in here. Gotta make sure you catch all those little things, all those little separations there. So, because that is a totally separate shape, so you gotta catch all those little bits there. And now I'm going to extrude this a distance of 0.756. Now it's going to default to cut here, and that is because we are extruding through an already existing body. Instead of cut, we actually want this to be a join. And, you know, I'll say, if you wanted to get real particular about it, 0.109, you could put like the smallest taper ever, because this motor is indeed tapered. It's tapered 0.01 over its entire length. So if you really wanted to, you could add a taper of like, I don't know, 0.1 degrees maybe. And that would actually have to be a negative 0.1 degrees. But, you know, like I said, it's a 0.1 taper, 0.01 taper over its entire length. So it's probably overkill, but it's too late. I already entered it in. All right. The next thing we want to do is we want to have our motor shaft. Oops, I missed a part. You can see I missed a part down here. So I'm actually going to go back and edit that feature and add in that little bit down there. There we go. Now that looks like my motor. Alright. Alright, so the last two parts that we need to extrude are a little lip here. So if I come up to my extrude menu or extrude tool again, and I choose all of the little bits inside of this circle, inside of that larger circle, this for me is going to be a negative number because I want it to come the opposite direction that I've been extruding out so far. So it's going to be a negative 0.0525. Alright. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to choose to make this, yeah, join as well. Yeah. Alright, now I'm going to extrude out my motor shaft there. So one more time, I'm going to grab from my create menu the extrude option. This time you will find it difficult to select the sketch parts that you want to extrude here. And that is because there is an object in front of them. So we still have like a three-dimensional space here, and our sketch is on the other side of this face. So what I'm going to do to circumvent that is I'm just going to turn off temporarily my bodies folder. So now I've hidden my bodies folder, and it's much easier for me to come in and pick the two sides of my motor shaft there. And then I can turn my bodies folder back on. Now the distance that this is going to be extruded is actually 0.31, and again remember it's a negative 0.31. Only I'm not measuring to the body of my motor, I'm measuring kind of to the top surface that we just extruded here. I'm measuring from this surface. So what I'm going to choose to do here is, instead of starting my extrusion see my extrude window here, instead of starting it from the profile plane, I'm going to choose to start it from an object. So if I choose to start it from an object, the object that I'm going to select is... What? That's weird. Why won't it let me choose? Maybe I gotta zoom in. Really doesn't want to pick that object. Why not? Let's try again. Let's extrude. I'm gonna hide that body and pick the object, pick the surfaces, not the surfaces, the sketches that I'm gonna extrude here. What if I pick my profile, my object first? Yeah, that it wants me to, it'll let me do. So it's interesting, if you choose your distance, 3 objects selected. All right. Hide that. If you choose your distance first, sorry, if you specify your distance first, and then you say, hey, I want to extrude it offset. Oh, now it's letting me do that. Oh, but it's actually setting my distance when I click here. Even though I've got this select button clearly checked, it won't let me do that second. So what I have to do is, from my create menu, choose extrude, choose the objects that I'm going to extrude, and then before I tell it a distance, I have to specify the object that I want to give it, that I want to start it from, and now I can give it a distance. And that distance again is 0.31, negative 0.31. And we're not going to do join here. I'm going to make this a new body. Because in the very last step here, we're going to add the thing that makes a motor is its ability to rotate around in circles in the specified amount and speed. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. I'm going to hide my motor profile sketch just because it kind of clutters things up a little bit. And now I've got 2 bodies that I'm going to name. So the main body 1 for me was my motor. I'm going to call it my motor body. And then the body 2 is our motor shaft. Something that we're going to touch on more later in this class, but we got a couple of minutes, is we can add joints to things. Oh boy. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah. How far did you extrude the like the motor hub and the motor shaft? I had trouble with my other extrude, so I missed the numbers.
That's totally cool. So this little the larger circle there?
Yes.
That was 0.0525.
Okay.
And then the motor shaft, we extruded that out. First you have to choose that you want to extrude it out.
0.525.
Oh,
right?
yes, yeah, sorry, negative.
That didn't look right.
Yeah. And I chose to do a join on that first one there, Mike. And then this motor shaft, I'm choosing to make this a new body. And before you specify a distance, I first chose the object that I wanted to extrude it from. So the start plane of our extrusion is going to be that front surface of that little hub that you just extruded. And then the distance after you select that as your start plane is negative 0.31. Are you guys following at home too? Are you guys good at home? 2 thumbs up. High fives all around.
I think I'm good. I might have a couple measurements off, but otherwise it looks right.
Okay. You got a measurement questions that I can do for you right now?
Nothing specific. I'll have to just go back and watch the video.
Okay, cool. Otherwise, hang out afterwards, Harold, and I'll spit some measurements at you.
Sure.
All right, cool. So, like I said, the last thing we want to do here before we finish up is make things move, and because that's fun. Before we can make things move, before we can add a joint to things, we first need to have more than one component. So right now we only have one component. That component is the main document component, which is right now called unsaved. However, you can make components out of bodies that you have. So from the create menu, if I come down to new component, it's the very top option, and I choose the little checkbox that says from bodies. Now, like, my naming my component goes away because the component's just going to be named whatever the bodies are named. So I can just click on the two bodies that I've got over here and say OK. So it didn't do a whole lot, but you'll notice that we've got components over here. You can tell they're components because they've got this little radio button next to them. So I can click on them and make them active and just choose to do things in that component. But the reason we wanted to do that, to make them their own components, is once they're components, we can choose to make joints out of them. So from the assemble option, if you choose as built joint, and now I change my joint type to revolute, I'm pretty sure we want to pick the shaft first, and then the motor body second, and then we'll specify a radius that it's going to be rotating around. So I'm just going to choose this circle back here. Hey, all right, I got it right. So the order of operations matters. If I choose my motor, and we can click the component in my browser. If I choose the motor body first and the shaft second, and then I make it spin, that's not exactly what we're going for accurate physical representation. So the order of operations matters. The object that you click on first is the object that will do the moving. So that shaft is going to move, and this motor body is not going to move. And then we specify a center point, and there we got our moving motor shaft spinning around in circles there. We've got a joint that we can name. We've got a joints folder here, so I'm going to go ahead and name that motor shaft. And that's it. It's just that easy. So we got a motor made for our window blinds project here. For the next class, I've got some things for you to download from the interweb. Should I how should I distribute that to you guys? Should I put it in the comments of this YouTube video and you can just click on a link? Or do you want me to put it in the chat? What do you think?
Comments would be nice.
Comments, yeah, I'll put it in the comments. So what we are eventually going to be downloading here, I'll share my, oops, I gotta do a thing real quick, and then I can, there we go. So I'm gonna send you to a great website. Even though this class is all about learning to use Fusion 360 and model and stuff, some things you don't need to model because they've already been made for you. And this is one of the, oh. This is one of those kind of things here. I'm choosing to use this little board in my project, and you know, so it's nice to have it modeled so you can stick it in your project somewhere. But so it'll be this board, and there'll be another little motor controller board that's already on GrabCAD, so you can pull it right from there and save ourselves a little bit of time. But again, I'll put those in the comments for the YouTube video, and then for next class I will show you how to import them, and we can start utilizing them in our drawing and making the guts of, or the main part of this class will be, you know, a structure like that with a bearing and gears and stuff. Gears, neat. All right, cool. We'll see you guys next week.